What's up, guys? How's it going? Welcome to the London session recap for Thursday, the 11th of August, 2022. Again, apologies for the slightly lower quality audio quality. Still don't trust my microphone, so just trying to get that sorted out whilst I'm using my headphones for now. Daily chart. So we've finally broken out of that consolidation after the release of CPI news yesterday's New York session. So we're really starting to see that kind of momentum kick in now with that pullback. We've pulled back up towards the EQ of the swing leg. So we're starting to get into that territory where we can potentially, expect that the swing lower high could form, but it's just increasing the probability, right, that the lower high could form here. It's much more likely than down here. Does that mean it's going to form here? Does that mean we have to instantly start looking for shorts? No, it's just becoming slightly more higher probability that it may form, right? So we've got three kind of main daily POIs that we're looking for. This one I think is obviously the least likely. It's the worst priced, right? It's the lowest down. It has no inducement in the leg, right? So no structural liquidity. There's nothing there. And also it didn't sweep anything, right? Even if I refine, because this is a range, right, taking the two candles, but you can easily refine that to the inside bar as well. So I'd probably expect price to push even deeper into that. But even if we take like the unrefined zone, we can see that none of these candles swept any liquidity, right? It's basically just a down movement, then the up movement, then the down movement, right? No structural high there was swept, which just increases the probability, especially as there's no inducement, that this is going to become inducement for zones above. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that it might not still give enough of a reaction and it has enough orders from within it. I'm more just talking about like the probability and odds of it being the zone that holds to then cause that daily move, right? So from an intraday perspective, this is why I don't get massively too caught up in what daily zones are going to do, because I'm just looking to kind of capture those kind of smaller movements, right? So we've had a bit of sensitivity from that level, starting to pull back, right, which isn't too surprising. But we're also aware that it's much more likely to at least push in towards this inside bar. And again, we may only get a bit of a reaction and then push up higher, okay? And then we get into sort of more of those more likely zones where we're more likely to see a more sustained daily bearish move, okay? I'm just trying to think of kind of anything else I want to add. Like also, right, we're now kind of getting this bullish internal structure, right, with that bullish daily IBOS there. So essentially we have that strong daily low. So that's the other way in which you can kind of help to use your bias, is that what do we expect with internal structure? Well, we expect it to stay bullish to facilitate that pullback. So we can trade those reactions from these levels down into those strong internal lows. Likewise, if we pop up to this level here, right, and then we start to look for shorts, at that point, we're probably going to have a strong daily internal low there, right, and then we can trade into that accordingly, and then we can look for longs from within here, right, and then target and so on and so forth. It's only once we get that bearish IBOS that gives us true confirmation that the swing pullback is finished, because then we have that true structural alignment where that larger internal structure is then realigned with the bearish swing structure, right, to then get that continued movement, and then we can look to short those strong internal highs, right, to take out the overall weak swing daily low there. So again, the point I'm trying to make is keep it nice and simple. We're bearish, we've had that swing pullback to the premium levels of supply now, and we have to bear in mind that that swing lower high could form at any point in time. So I'm happy to look for shorts, but I'm also bearing in mind that all shorts could just be a reaction, basically just to facilitate that internal pullback to then continue higher, right? So we may get a reaction from here like we already have, push deeper into the zone, into that inside bar, again, get another reaction, push up into here, right, get another reaction, again, so on and so forth. So I'm happy to keep looking for shorts, and then happy to keep looking for those longs on those strong internal lows. And then once we get that confirmation from the market, and then we get those shorts here, right, that's when you can hold with a lot more confidence to then potentially target that low, okay? So it's just about managing your expectations of what is going to happen from each of those POIs. This POI is obviously a lot higher probability than this one. It's better priced, it's higher up, but it's also the extreme of the reaction leg of the flip. So we have demand here, right? That broke structure, price came into that demand, reacted, and pushed down, right? So that's the extreme of the reaction where supply stepped into the market to overpower demand and break structure, right? Fell to point a higher high, supply steps in. It also swept liquidity, and it can potentially use this as inducement here, okay? So yeah, probably expecting higher prices, but we're going to see a bit of turbulence, let's say, from these levels of supply here. So 4-hour chart, this is kind of when you can really use this as your guide to understand, when the daily chart is really going to likely turn around. So I had this as one big bearish swing range on the 4-hour chart. Okay, so this is the week's 4-hour swing low, and that is that strong 4-hour high up here. Obviously, that's quite a big range, so then we can zoom into the internal structure and really kind of pay a lot more attention to that as our main sort of guide, especially when we're trading intraday, and we can see how we shifted bullish, pulled back, had another break there, right, pulled back, and then yesterday during the CPI news, we had another break there to the upside. So now we're playing with this new internal range, right, that being the lowest point that took out the high, so this is the new range that we're working within. So again, we can just keep following this. I mean, some of you may have even mapped this as your swing structure if you use slightly tighter mapping, right? And what we're looking for, we're looking for price to pull back, potentially form that high low from within here, right? Because we expect the strong low to hold, and then we can target that week high, so on and so forth. In terms of 4-hour supply, if we look left, we haven't mitigated anything refined, okay? We do have the buy to sell range here. That's basically the daily POI, which we've already mapped with this larger box. So we're reacting from that level. Quite a strong reaction, quite an initial big spike. So yeah, that was making me think, yeah, we probably will see, especially when you get those big news candles, what can often happen is price just retraces that whole move the next day. And you tend to get kind of these corrective, tricky moves on, let's say, the M15, and then it comes down. Something I was also cautious of is there's no inducement in the leg. That's what I use with these empty boxes, right? You want to see some nice structural liquidity to act as inducement for your POI, but there was nothing there. So yeah, if we came down to here, I would have been a bit cautious trading from this zone, and maybe look for a bit more confirmation on the lower timeframes. However, it did sweep liquidity. So that's basically kind of what was going through my mind when I'm looking at the 4-hour chart as I'm getting to my desk, getting ready to trade, pre-Frankfurt Open, is strong reaction from supply. I wasn't expecting this to be the move that goes on to go from there, simply because we haven't mitigated anything that refined on the daily chart. Really, I think it's much more likely we're just going to get that internal pullback to then continue up higher. But obviously, be aware of both scenarios, because if we do get that, then fine, I'll switch my bias, and then we can start to expect that. So for me, definitely favoured this 4-hour internal structure. I think continuing, considering what we're not really coming off anything that refined as of yet, and obviously this is quite a lot of bullish momentum, right? So I did think it was a pretty decent opportunity we could go up, but yeah, it doesn't really matter. I don't really care too much. I just follow the framework and try and outline the areas of high probability in which to capture a decent 20 to 40 pip move, right? So that's the 4-hour chart. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to add there. Not so much. So M15. Now this is, I think, where it gets a bit more interesting, right? Because if you were mapping your swing structure with the larger structures like I had been, how we had it last week, right, where we had that initial bullish boss here, remember, and then some people had mapped these as your swing structures, and that's absolutely fine, and it's shifted bearish for you, right? And then you have some smaller structure mapping, and then it was bullish, right? And then we had that another break there. So if you have it like that, that was your last bullish boss, and then this would be your swing low, right? At this point here, when we have that break of structure, that's one way you could map it. Or if you kept it kind of looking at these larger swings like I had, right, then this whole move was one bearish leg there. That was the swing low, and that was the swing high, right? And when we got that bullish boss, right, now everyone will be aligned bullish no matter kind of what way you map it. The difference will be is how you interpret this pullback here. Is this pullback here significant enough for you? If it isn't, and you just viewed that basically as one big leg, then yes, you will have your swing low down here, and that's absolutely fine. And then the other ones of you who are a bit more aggressive with your mapping, who did it this way, right, and maybe you all viewed that as one leg, then you'd have your low down here. Now, I was debating kind of keeping it down here, because obviously this pullback is not really that significant when you're looking at the size of the pullbacks that we've been using for M15 structure. But I kind of just made the decision, kind of getting to my desk, that sort of happy to view it as swing structure, because it also leads to a lot less confusion, I've noticed, when we kind of use a slightly tighter mapping, just because it can be a bit easier for people to keep track of things. Otherwise, you can get the situation like we did last week. We got internals with internals with internals, and it can all get a little bit lost. Also, this low here, it's basically you can use a 4 hours, the internal structure as for that. So as long as you're using multi-time frame analysis and you are, you know how to read internal structure, it doesn't really massively matter, where you have your swing structure, because you can see what structure is relative to what other piece of structure. So I know that can sound like a bit of a mouthful, but what I'm trying to get at here is that even if I go, okay, I want to map this as my swing structure, and we switch bearish, you have to ask yourself, what was the point of this M15 switching bearish? Did the M15 switch bearish here because the daily lower high is in place and we're going to go? No, you can't read all the way into that. You look at the most recent piece of price action. So what I mean, what I'm trying to get at here, I know it sounds like a bit of a riddle, but when we shift bearish here, right, I can see that it's probably just to facilitate the pullback of this big leg, right? Like, what is this piece of structure relevant to? It's relevant to like this bit here, right? And we've just switched bearish to facilitate most likely this move, right, to form the higher low of this piece of price action, right? We obviously have a big leg here, right? This big range, right? And then if you look at the smaller range, well, then we've just shifted bearish to facilitate the pullback of that. So then if we then shift bullish, right, then it's likely that high low is in place and we're going to target this high. So this way, I guess it gets a little bit more tricky. So you sort of have this big move, which I pretty much view that as one leg. Okay, so then there's a possibility that this could just be a pullback into this lower high, right? And we could come down. And then that's one scenario I'm looking at, right? This sort of larger structure, which, you know, I've denoted it as a swing structure. But then from within that, you've got the smaller internal structure, okay? So if this shifts bullish here, right, this small structure, one scenario is that it's just shifted bullish, the small navy dots, it's just shifted bullish to facilitate the pullback of this leg here. Sorry, this leg here, okay? That's the first thing I'd be thinking is, okay, that could just be one possibility, is we just shift bullish for this leg here. So then what I would want to see is this then shift bearish, right, to signal that that pullback is now over, that lower high is in place, and now we can then target that low, right? That's one interpretation of basically how this structure is going to be once we shift bullish there, if that happens, okay? But considering, you know, the overall momentum, the overall story, how the 4-hour chart is, etc., the fact we haven't mitigated anything that refined up here, just the kind of that daily range, right? And this is basically that one big leg, and we're most likely pulled back to form that higher low. I'm very, very cautious of kind of viewing this as that like strong high, that protected high. And if this then shifts bullish, right, I'm actually kind of more leaning towards the fact that that's likely going to be to signal the end of this leg here, okay? So what I think will help you guys to really understand what I'm getting here is if I actually simplify this a bit more. Just thinking to not call this swing structure, right? And to actually stick to do you know what? I'm just going to leave it where it is because otherwise this is going to cause even more confusion. But yeah, hopefully you guys can kind of see how to separate this out in your mind, and hopefully you can kind of hold those two scenarios in your mind at once. So again, I'm going to try and keep it a bit more simple, right? Almost like you might always like the name swing or internal or the internal, like it's all kind of irrelevant what you want to call it. It's more just understanding what piece of structure is relevant to the next piece of structure. It's like what range we're within, right? So we clearly have this pullback and then this movement up. So like that's one high and that is one low, right? And then within that, I use a different color, say blue, right? Within that then you have like this pullback, right? That movement up and then that movement there. So there's always a possibility, right, that we could then have a pullback into this high, right? That blue high being protected, and then we move down. But this large blue structure, I would just view if it stays bearish, this blue structure, which I've obviously mapped it as my swing structure today. If that stays bearish, right, all I'm viewing this bearish move at this moment, this bearish blue move, is just to facilitate the pullback of this orange leg. That's like basically what I've been thinking. Of course, it doesn't have to happen. This could just go up and blast up through, because obviously the orange leg is more important than the blue leg, right? That's the bigger piece of structure, especially when we pull back to the discount of this leg, which I've denoted here. But I'm going to try to take this one step at a time, right? So that's what I'd be thinking with this larger structure in terms of the M15 swing structure as I've mapped it. But I'm aware of the bigger orange structure. So that's why if we start shooting up here with a lot of momentum to this high, yes, it is a strong blue high, like with the blue structure, but the orange structure in this case matters more, right? Because that's the bigger structure and that overpowers the blue structure in this instance. So if we start shooting up here with a lot of momentum, I'd be very, very cautious. I'd be thinking, yeah, it's probably likely this high is going to go. And I'd want to see a bit more confluence over here. I'd want to see price turning around a lot more before I'm thinking that this lower high is going to be in place and this high is going to hold, right? Because the orange structure is more powerful. Hopefully that makes sense. So then if I use another color, right, don't want to make this too confusing, right? And then we can look at this structure here, right? And we've got this coming down now. If this then shifts bullish, right, and we get that bullish IBOS, I'm going to zoom in a bit. right? The simplest way to think about this, first of all, is that at a minimum, this green structure has shifted bullish to facilitate the blue pullback, right? To facilitate the blue pulling back up into the protected blue high, right? That's kind of your bare minimum. If this green structure shifts bullish, we then expect this to stay bullish, right, to facilitate that pullback, right? That's the bare minimum. So let's stick with the kind of simple case. That's what we'd be thinking. So if the blue lower high, is going to form, right? What would give us good confirmation that the blue lower high is going to form? It would be the green structure shifting bearish, right? So that's where, if you have conflicting biases, if you're not sure, again, bear with me with the colors. If you're not sure if the orange structure is about to take over now, right? Because we've pulled back below the EQ, right? And that's the biggest structure. And if you're not sure that this is going to be the next move and we're going to go up and smash those highs, because at the moment, like as the session developed, that's basically what I thought was going to be more likely to happen. We'll have to remains to be seen. But because this is the bigger move, because you're essentially looking at that bigger move, and we come down here, as we start to move up, especially with all the momentum, the orange for me is the most powerful. It's more powerful than the blue and the green because it's the bigger structure. So I'm much more likely to think that that's going to be the move that goes, okay? So if this green structure shifts bullish, right, let's say at the start of the session, at a bare minimum, it's shifted bullish to facilitate the blue pullback, right? But if I'm trying to catch that potential blue lower high to then catch that next bearish blue leg to the downside, but I'm cautious that I think that orange high low could be in place and actually we're just going to do that, then instead of me just jumping in on sort of any entry from within here or from within here on the M1, like you normally sort of would do when you're trading pro M15 trend, because the M15 move bearish, the blue line is bearish, instead of just kind of jumping in like you would in other conditions, right, you have to be aware of that larger orange structure, that it's, you know, a good possibility. So this is why I was saying in the EU chat, in this particular instance, I don't just want to jump in from within here, right? I want to see structure shifting. So that's where you want to see either the green internal structure shift bearish, right? Or you want to see like that M15 choke. I want to see something on the M15 happen. Like I want to see some bearish M15 confluence as we come into these levels to give me more confidence that this blue lower high is going to form and we're going to get that next leg to the downside. Okay? All right, hopefully I haven't lost too many of you. This is obviously the advanced internal structure stuff, but it really, really helps you when you can just look at the bigger pieces of structure and just understand what is each piece doing in relation to the other, right? So you've got the bigger structure, and you've got the slightly smaller structure, and you've got the slightly smaller structure. And they all just, like, the first smaller structure turns to facilitate the pullback of this leg, right? But then you want to see this small structure shift bearish to signal that that larger leg is finished. This larger leg is finished, right? And then we expect that small structure to stay bearish, right, to take out that low. So if it doesn't, and the small structure stays bullish the whole time, well, then that's a good sign that likely this larger leg is probably going to do that, okay? So yeah, so I'm going to leave that there before I kind of unnecessarily confuse you any more than I need to. So what my thought process then in terms of coming into the Frankfurt session was, well, I'm cautious, regardless of whether you view this as a swing break of structure or just a larger internal break of structure, it's still a break of structure, right, of a pretty significant low. And we haven't, since that break, right, we haven't had a sizable pullback, you know, that's the same kind of size of this. We haven't had, and this is what I mean, like, in terms of what piece of structure is what, maybe pitfalls will help you, okay, but obviously since that movement, we haven't really had a bearish movement the same size after the break. So what I'm trying to get at here is after that break, what we're going to expect. We're going to expect a pullback of that structure, right? We'd expect something like that, which we haven't had yet. We've had these kind of minor pauses. So what that tells me is that, yeah, these are different pieces of structure compared to what this movement is. And that's why, I had those different colors. So again, the point I'm really trying to get to here is after that break, what do we expect? We expect a sizable pullback, and we haven't had that yet. So I was looking to basically follow this bearish order flow. But if you do that, it's a lot more, let's say, aggressive / lower probability because we haven't yet had that larger pullback. And at any point, that's likely going to kick in. So we'll just bring this forward a couple. Yeah, when I had this, we sold off quite nicely. We sold some liquidity, et cetera, et cetera. We hadn't yet come into any demand. Part of me, it is partly FOMO, but it's also partly me, I was kind of happy to just take the aggressive trade in this instance. I set a risk entry on with the M1 POI right in here just because I thought, even though it's low probability, if this order flow does play out, I could get very, very decent high risk reward towards that low for that move. So yeah, I ended up taking it. But as we can see here, I ended up getting smashed, okay? So it is what it is. Okay, but now, what has happened in terms of the structure? Well, that smaller structure has now shifted bullish. So now what do we expect is we expect at sort of a minimum, we're going to get the pullback of this larger piece of structure. Okay, that's kind of like my minimum case scenario is we're getting the pullback of this structure and then potentially we'll get that movement. But the other possibility, and the one that I was kind of more leaning towards, is that this larger structure, now that pullback is over, right? And now I'm going to expect this to happen. Okay, that's kind of my main scenario of what I was thinking in this particular case, right? So as we get that bullish breaker structure, this becomes a strong internal low. But these old little supply zones here, right? What is their job going to do now? They're only going to be reaction points to facilitate those internal pullbacks, right? Move up, reaction point to facilitate that internal pullback. Okay. Now, obviously, some supply zones are going to be better than others. Like this is higher up. It led to this break here. It flipped this level. So potentially, you could expect a bigger reaction from here, or the one that might then end up following through to get that move. But ultimately, whilst this structure is still bullish, I'm only going to expect, if I look to the left, them to provide that, unless it then actually leads to the IBOS. Then you have the confirmation, and that's what I was trying to say at the start. As we come up into these levels, you see a small reaction, and then we go. And that's why I wouldn't want to look to short from within here, because the risk to reward into this previous range is so small. Like if you draw it on, right, you can see we come up, we switch bullish, we react from this pretty, not that major significant levels of supply, right? So you could, short from this, but what's the expectation of price? The expectation is it's just going to pull back, most likely into the prior demand range, which is what it did. It mitigated it. So if you've taken a short, you want to already be right within here. And by the time it pulls back, you want to be basically at break even, or you've taken your profits. What you do not want to do is when price is down here and it's pulled back, is now having like a short order here, because this zone has done its job. It's facilitated the pullback. So now if you're trying to short here with your order, right, boom, you're going to get smashed, more likely than not, okay? Cool. So now as we're coming up to this, yes, this is what I would say is a better POI than this at this instance, because it obviously, it's higher up in the leg, it's higher up within this range. It could do that. It did break structure. But if you kind of look at price action as well, that's kind of just one leg down. It's kind of halfway in this leg. It's even that you can view as that one leg down. It's all just a little bit, it's not really that prominent to me at this point. So especially, again, considering the bigger picture, you always have to take in the whole narrative. We've had this pullback. We've essentially started to come up with a lot of momentum. Like, this zone to me just doesn't stand out. It really doesn't. So if that was going to hold, that's what I was saying in the chat. At a minimum, I want to see a bearish M15 shot from here. But ideally, right, you want to see like more of an IBOS from here and see something like that, because this just does not stand out as high probability to me at all. Could it have played out, of course, but yeah, I don't know. Like for me, it just doesn't look good. Like impulsive, corrective pullback. Right, we're starting to get impulsive leg up. Like this is where I just expect that impulse to stay and take out this week high, and I'm viewing this swing structure as very cautionary. So yeah, I can appreciate how this is a bit tricky to maybe get your head around a little bit. But I don't know, hopefully I've made myself somewhat clear to the majority of you. Hope I haven't lost too many of you here. But that's kind of just my thought process of like, I was happy to kind of follow the order flow right at the start. Okay, boom, get smashed out. Now it's shifted. Okay, now I'm chilling. I'm more interested in longs. I was actually looking for price to come down to here. This would have been absolutely textbook, not this one, but this one here. So when we had, this break here and we came into here, I was looking for price to come into here, and then that's where I wanted to get long, basically, to then try and play that move. But yeah, it just didn't quite pull back deep enough. Bit of a shallow pullback, no entry, and then just started shooting up. And then, yeah, price ended up trading through the zone, so it didn't even give an M15 shock or an M1 shock. So yeah, hopefully no one should have taken any losses from within here. And then yes, it did push up, and there is M15 supply here, but it's really not great. Like it hasn't flipped anything. It's kind of, for me, that's just nothing. Also, if you're very, very strict, like this POI, the next candle didn't close below its low. So it's technically not really M15 supply. It's just not great. It's like we've smashed up through it. I think just trying to short here is just you're really, really forcing it. Like, look at this. Like at a minimum, just try and wait for an M15 chock. The only time I'd maybe say like be aggressive without the chock is from this high, just because like this is the last point of this structure is going to have to hold if that thesis is going to play out. Like not so much like this random sort of POI here, right? Like look at this. Yeah, hopefully it's just a bit more obvious. And also I can see the logic for longs, but just for me, it's too high up in the leg. There wasn't really clear structure for me to work with, so it's not really anything that meets my plan. And yeah, now we've shot back up, and this would be a bit more where I've got a bit more structure with if I'm going to look for longs, because now I have an M15 POI. But this is out of session for me, and we've got high impact news coming during New York. So yeah, I'm done for the day as always. As you guys know, I don't trade New York, but yeah, if I was going to follow this continuation further up, this is sort of what I'd be looking for, at least, right? We've got a clear M15 POI, rather than me necessarily trying to like catch this moment here. Like that doesn't really make my plan in this instance. Cool. So yeah, I mean, it's very hard when I'm going through these concepts. Obviously, I'm talking to myself and looking at a screen. I can't gauge any of you guys who are watching this content, what your reactions are, if you're lost, what bit I lost you at. So yeah, watch this as many times as you need, and as always, ask questions in Discord, and we'll do our best to try and help you. But yeah, trust me, it will come with time. It's just one of those things that comes with time and experience, where you can get a good read on price action. But yeah, ultimately for me, if I could go back, I probably wouldn't label this as swing structure, especially when, like, if I can be consistent with how I was sticking to those larger swings. This is definitely more just an internal pullback, like that larger internal pullback. And that's why, like, I'm happy to kind of, I quickly do my forecast in the morning, and then, like, as price action started to move and I have more time to stare at price action and look at what's going on and, make better decisions. Really, like, if I was just trading and I wasn't, sharing my trade charts with you guys, I would have just deleted this as swing structure. I would have kept it to where it was, with the bigger low down here, and I can kind of flip my bias like that. But I guess I try to be consistent, because I don't want to post my pre-session analysis and then suddenly I post my markup and I've like changed my structure around, because that's not really going to help anyone. But hopefully, you guys can understand where I'm coming from. And yeah, anyway, I'm gonna leave it there before I ramble anymore. But yeah, hopefully you guys take some value from that, and I'll see you next one. Cheers, guys.